Welcome to another episode of When Women Walked. I'm Madison, and this week really has had me thinking, just with everything going on in the world about just life and my loved ones, my friends and family, and I'm planning a trip to go see them shortly for my niece's birthday, and I just am very happy to have that opportunity to get to see my family and hug them and be there for the special moments. And I hope for those of you listening that you just remember to hug your loved ones a little tighter today. So with that, in honor of the upcoming holiday of Passover, I want to dedicate an episode to a young Jewish woman who really has inspired me. She was a young poet, but she also did some very courageous things, and I think poetry is one of the ways I love to express myself. And so as we enter spring, we, leave winter behind, which is often associated with death, and we're entering renewal and life. And so I just really, as I'm sitting here outside and my neighbors are starting to mow their lawns and we're starting to plant flowers and herbs here in our own garden. So I want to recognize just not only everything going on in the world, but also recognize that we as humans get to have new chapters in our lives, and we get to start over and start fresh if we choose to and have the, resources and capabilities. And I'm thankful to have that. And so I want to, start this episode. There's a poem written by this young woman during the darkest chapter of the 20th century. And it's only 4 lines long. It's not a long poem. But those 4 lines would become one of the most powerful expressions of resistance arguably ever written. And the poem says, "Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame." And the woman who wrote those words was only 23 years old. Her name was Hannah Senesh. She was a poet. She was a daughter. She was a refugee. And she was a soldier. In 1944, at the height of the Holocaust, Hannah Senesh did something almost unimaginable. She volunteered for a mission that many believed was suicide. She trained with the British military. She parachuted as a Jewish woman. She parachuted into Nazi-occupied Europe. And she attempted to cross into Hungary, the country of her birth, to help rescue Jews who were being deported to Auschwitz. She carried a radio transmitter, false papers, and the knowledge that if she were captured, the consequences would be brutal. And you know what? She was captured. She was tortured. And she was executed by firing squad. But even as the Nazis tried to silence her, Hannah left behind something they could never destroy: her words, her courage, and a story that reminds us that resistance does not always come from armies or governments. Sometimes it comes from a single young woman who refuses to look away and who is willing to lay her life down. This is the story of Hannah Senesh. A childhood between worlds. Hannah was born on July 17th, 1921 in Budapest, Hungary. At the time, Hungary was still reeling from the aftermath of World War I. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had collapsed. Borders had been redrawn, and political instability shaped daily life. Hannah was born into a Jewish family that was both cultured and deeply integrated into Hungarian society. Her father, Béla Szent, was a well-known playwright and journalist. His humor and literary talent made him famous throughout Hungary. But he died when Hannah was only 6 years old, and his death left a deep mark on the family. Hannah's mother, Catherine, suddenly found herself raising 2 children alone. Despite the tragedy, education and culture remained central to Hannah's upbringing. She attended a prestigious Protestant girls' school, one of the best in Budapest. But as she grew older, Hannah began to experience something that would shape the rest of her life: anti-Semitism. Hungary in the 1930s was becoming increasingly hostile towards Jews. Jewish students faced quotas. Jewish professionals were pushed out of jobs. Political movements inspired by fascism were gaining popularity. And even within her school, Hannah noticed the difference. She excelled academically. She became class president. But when the time came to confirm her leadership role, the school administration refused to allow it, simply because she was Jewish. Moments like that changed her. In her diary, Hannah wrote about the confusion and pain of realizing that the country she loved did not fully accept her. But those experiences also led to something else: Zionism. And during the 1930s, many Jewish young people across Europe began turning toward the idea of building a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So for Hannah, this idea became a calling. She began attending Zionist meetings. She studied Hebrew, and she began imagining a life far away from the growing dangers of Europe. So by 1939, the situation in Europe was becoming increasingly dangerous for Jews. Adolf Hitler had already annexed Austria, Nazi Germany had occupied Czechoslovakia, and anti-Semitic laws were spreading across the continent. Hannah made a decision that would change the course of her life. At the young age of 18, she left Hungary and immigrated to Palestine, which at the time was under British control. And the journey was not easy. It meant leaving behind her mother, her home, her language. But Hannah believed she was moving towards something meaningful. She joined an agricultural training school and later became part of a kibbutz, a communal farming community. Life on the kibbutz was physically demanding. Days began before sunrise. Work in the fields lasted long hours. But Hannah embraced the challenge. She believed in building something new, a homeland where Jews could live safely and freely. And at the same time, she continued to write. Her diary entries from this period reveal a young woman full of reflection and idealism. She wrote about nature, about identity, about belonging. But as the war in Europe intensified, the tone of her writing began to change. Because by the early 1940s, reports of mass violence against Jews were reaching Palestine. Entire communities were disappearing, and Hannah felt a growing sense of urgency. She began asking herself a question that would ultimately define her life. What does responsibility look like in a time of catastrophe? So by 1943, news of the Holocaust had reached much of the world. The scale of the destruction was becoming clearer. Millions of Jews across Europe were being deported to ghettos, labor camps, and extermination camps. In Palestine, Jewish leaders were desperately searching for ways to help. One plan involved working with the British Special Operations Executive, the organization responsible for training spies and resistance fighters. But the idea was incredibly dangerous. Jewish volunteers would be trained as paratroopers. They would parachute into Nazi-occupied Europe. Their goals were to assist resistance movements and attempt to rescue Jewish communities. And a very small number of all of those who volunteered were selected, about 37 people. And among them was young Hannah. At just 22 years old, she volunteered immediately, not a second thought, and she fully understood the risks. Again, capture could mean torture, execution, or worse. But she believed she had a responsibility to act. Training began in Egypt under British supervision. The recruits learned survival techniques, radio communication, parachuting, and covert operations. And Hannah proved to be one of the most skilled and determined trainees. And while she was not the strongest physically, she possessed something else. Something you can't teach. An unshakable sense of purpose. So before leaving for the mission, Hannah wrote another line that would later become famous. And this line, every time I read it, gives me chills. This is one of the last things she will ever write. She did ever write, "I am going because I must."